I'd like to speak a little bit more about the first hindrance of desire today. One of the, I think, really brilliant things that the Buddha did 2,600 years ago is he often taught in similes. And this is quite powerful because now, thousands of years later, we can use those similes to really understand what he was talking about. During his time, there wasn't a written language in India. So he spoke a particular dialect that has died. And then a few hundred years after the Buddha passed away, his teachings were recorded in a different language called Pali. And then over thousands of years, that has been translated and interpreted and misinterpreted and reinterpreted. And here we are. So the similes are really helpful. So he talks about desire, the hindrance of desire, as debt. Which is interesting because that's not normally how we talk about desire in society today. But he's pointing to the feeling of lacking that occurs when we long for something, or I should say desire something that we don't have. And I think actually not every desire has the same level of that feeling of debt. But this is something that we can surely observe if we put forth some effort. I mean, right here, right now, there's probably something that you can think about that you really want in your life. And as you reflect on it, you will feel impoverished. You will feel lacking. The sense of debt. The sense of, I need that to feel whole. This is a very prevalent force in our minds. Typically, there's a story that we're telling ourselves. It's once I get this, then I will be happy. Once I change my job, once I get a promotion, once I make more money, then I'll be more happy, then I'll be more stable. Or once I find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or once we fix our relationship issue, once we get married, once we have children, then I can rest. And for most desires, if we're being honest with ourselves, that story is never true. We get the promotion. We get the girl or the boy. And what happens? For how long does that leave us feeling satisfied before another desire arises? I remember asking our meditation group, a little over a year ago maybe, about asking folks, tell me about the happiest moment of your life. And several people talked about when they received test scores back for a really important test. And how they felt a sense of elation. And then when we dug deeper, we found that elation lasted moments. And then the mind started to think about what's next. Okay, this test allows me to progress in my career and get to the next step, but how's that going to be for me? So then we immediately go to desiring the next stage of success in that path. So this is the nature of desire as a hindrance. It's not really about the content. Remember, hindrances are naturally occurring phenomena that occur in the human heart. you can't fulfill your desires or end all desire by achieving what or finding what it is that you desire. That's getting wrapped up in the content of the desire. It's not actually addressing the hindrance itself. We often talk about how we take things for granted. Right? It's a very popular thing that someone might tell you, don't take what you have for granted. But is there anyone who's in the history of people who've heard that little bit of advice who was able to execute and not take things for granted? The answer is probably no, because what's driving it is the hindrance of desire. Always wanting more. And I'll offer some reflections from my own life. When I first met my now fiance, and we were dating, we met when we were 22, and I was fresh out of college and had, all these young, dumb ideas about what I wanted from a relationship. So I met this girl who was, really, really a beautiful human being and someone that I loved very much and cared for, but I could not quell the hindrance of desire. So it's funny because, when this is a bit of an aside, but when you listen to the radio, right, you'll hear 100 songs and 90 of them will be about love. And the songs will talk about love in, let's say, the way Justin Bieber talks about love. And I know some people in our meditation group are big Bieber fans, and I actually am as well. So I'm not trying to to poke fun at Bieber himself, but in the way love is talked about in those love songs, or the way it's talked about in Disney movies, there's this sort of championing and obsession with obsessive love. As a society, especially in young people, and I would say people who lack a lot of relationship experience in particular, there's this idea of, falling so deeply in love that you're obsessed with someone, that you need them. But how does that play out? I mean, from my own experience, I remember, putting a lot of pressure on my relationship because I felt that what the elements of the relationship were not enough. I needed more. I needed more time with my girlfriend, more freedom with her. In my case, I was dating a Sri Lankan girl, and in our culture, there's, we have a culture, and as like most Asian immigrant cultures, where there's not a ton of freedom, especially for women, for daughters. So parents have a pretty good reign on things. And so I remember going from college where I, with college girlfriends, that wasn't the case, right? There's no parents, so there's no one to tell you what to do or where to go or what obligations you have. You're basically free to do as you please. So anyway, I remember being in this relationship and feeling all this desire. And it equated to me taking things for granted, not appreciating what I had, and always feeling like I needed more. Feeling like, again, a sense of poverty, a sense of lacking. So I took the Justin Bieber route. And it was extremely destructive for that relationship. And, having been on the receiving end of that sort of desire as well, it is very uncomfortable. It's similar to a parent who never has enough. So again, poking at my culture, the stereotypical Sri Lankan parent is never satisfied with 1A, or they're never satisfied. They always need you to do more, to be more accomplished. And I'm speaking very generally, right? So obviously I'm painting broad strokes here. But what does it feel like to be a child when your parent always needs more from you? It can be very painful. So someone had a question about love and desire in our group. And this story, I think, relates to that question. So the question was, how does the hindrance of desire intersect with love and passion? I imagine the latter are regarded as good things, but if desire is a bad thing, then the idea must be to love without desire, which always sounded cool, but I never thought that as practical, at least in my daily life. So it's interesting, I bring up my relationship with Julia, and apologies to her. But I think the story is quite helpful. So in our case, we ended our relationship for a period of time, and then we got back together. So there's a very clear demarcation of round 1 and round 2, and we always joke about that. Now in round 2, which I'm currently in, there is still desire for one another, but I can speak to from my own heart. There's also a sense of fullness. There's a sense of how lucky I am, how full I feel to have her love, her company, her support. And that's a fullness that I can tap into. And in part due to this practice of meditation, I can actually bring myself to tears with appreciation, contentment, and this feeling of just being absolutely full. A sense of abundance. And so that is a skill. Learning to tap into that is a skill. And what does it do? It allows me to take some pressure off, to not need so much from her, and to actually be a better boyfriend, a better fiance, and one day a better husband. When love is tainted by too much desire, it becomes needy. It becomes needy. I remember being in the hospital last year for an appendectomy, and my mother, so I had an operation, and my mother came in the day after the operation, and as part of the, I guess, protocols for getting better, you're supposed to go and walk around, right? So I remember going on this walk with my mother, and we were talking about different things, and she was worrying about me for one reason or another. I can't remember. As mothers do, she was worrying about me. And I remember being quite annoyed. And I asked her, like, well, why are you worrying about me? Like, I'm fine. And she said something like, this is what mothers do. Mothers worry. And I remember telling her that that's an excuse. So and I think at the time she would have said that that's part of a mother's love, to worry about her child. And I challenged that notion for her. Do you really need to worry all the time about your child? Is that the destiny of a mother? Is a mother bound to feeling that sense of worry all the time? That sense of desire for her child to feel safe? Is a mother not allowed some relief from that? And as I tend to be with my mom, I was quite direct. I said something like, you can either listen to that voice in your head that's telling you that this is what mothers do, or you can listen to the Buddha, but you cannot listen to both. And to her credit, I think she really took that. It is possible for love to be washed of that neediness, of the lacking and debt that comes with the hindrance of desire. So I want to read a quote by Rumi, who is a Muslim mystic. And this quote actually deals with emptiness, which is a very deep notion that we'll cover in later talks. But there's something that I think we can explain that's relevant here. So the quote goes, "Essence is emptiness, everything else accidental. Emptiness brings peace to loving, everything else dis-ease. In this world of trickery, emptiness is what your soul wants." So I'll say that again. Essence is emptiness, everything else accidental. Emptiness brings peace to loving, everything else dis-ease. In this world of trickery, emptiness is what your soul wants. So that line, emptiness brings peace to loving, is a really interesting idea. And before we even get to emptiness, can we imagine a love that is peaceful? A love that is peaceful. So when I think about, round 2 of my relationship, my love is more peaceful. It's less crazy. It's less obsessive. It has more spaciousness to it, more elasticity. It's flexible. It's less rigid. It's less demanding. It's a love that has less expectations and more openness. What we can say is the love is less conditioned. So we all know what it's like to have love that's conditioned, to feel like someone loves me or cares about me only if I do X, Y, and Z, if I'm a good boy or a good girl, if I'm successful. And if we're lucky, there will be times in our life where we will have felt love that was more unconditioned, that was less conditioned. Now that is a powerful love. A love unblemished by desire and need. remember listening to a podcast that Dave Chappelle did where he talks about being a young comedian, and he opened for Richard Pryor, who, if you don't know Richard Pryor, he was a very famous comedian from an older generation who was regarded by many as the best in the business. So Chappelle was opening for him later in his career, and he said that, for his bit, he actually pulled some of his punches and maybe he didn't kill the crowd as much as he normally did. In part, because he respected Richard Pryor so much. He wanted to just warm the crowd up just enough for Richard to go on, and so Richard could have the best possible performance. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because he was older or if it was just an off day, but Richard was not able to perform. And there was even a lapse in the performance where he just kind of paused because he knew that he didn't have it today. He couldn't bring it. And Chappelle talks about how someone on the very back of the arena just yelled, "We love you," to Richard Pryor. And the place just erupted with applause. It's a really beautiful idea, beautiful scene. And Dave Chappelle remarks on how when he saw that, he realized that was something that he wanted. He wanted that kind of love, which I think is wise. A love that is less conditioned, less dependent on conditions, or in this case, dependent on great jokes. That is a love that is more desirable than a love that is given due to a performance. I could actually go on this topic for quite a bit, but my main point here is that it is possible to lower the amount of desire in love. And we often make the mistake, and this point is actually quite important. When we hear some of these concepts that are taught in Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, Hinduism, whatever, other spiritual traditions, like this idea of love that's purified of desire, we go from 0 to 100. So we try to imagine the absolute peak of that concept. What might love actually be like with zero desire? And because that seems so far off and impractical, and we don't even know what that might look like, we just cut ourselves away from that possibility. We put that to the side. We don't try to pursue that. We don't even question it any further. What I would suggest is that we work with degrees. What if we turn that desire and the love from 100% down to 95% and see how that feels? Turn it down to 70%, see how that feels. What we might find is actually the love is still there. It's actually stronger. It feels more pure, more real, more praiseworthy. It feels like it's been purified of some sort of distortion. It's actually more effective. As the example I gave in my relationship, my love was more effective when it was cleansed from that high degree of desire. It allowed the relationship to flourish. There's another question that came in that says, is the loss of desire a good thing? Does that mean you're less hindered? So this question comes from a place where, desire is actually championed. Right? Like we're taught to desire things very, very strongly. So for me personally, the answer to this is not black and white, it's more gray. I've heard other teachers, particularly Buddhist monks, talk about how every desire is to be defeated. And I think there is some merit to that approach, or that notion, some merit. So if you think about a time in your life where you did not feel desire, where you actually felt content and satiated, maybe it was on the meditation cushion, maybe it was on your wedding day, or when you proposed, or when you won a game at some sporting event, or you got you accomplished a particular goal, or maybe it was just when you were surrounded by family on one Thanksgiving night and you felt the love and support of those around you. When you feel fullness, when you feel like you have enough, when you feel like you have an abundance, it is extremely beautiful and moving. And so as a meditator, it is certainly, that is something that we practice and we develop, our ability to feel that way, to feel that fullness. So from that standpoint, you can say very clearly that when you feel the desire, in contrast, that is far more negative. That desire is characterized typically by suffering, by a sense of lacking. So I think that's worth stating. But some desires are quite necessary. The desire for spiritual progress is one that is highly encouraged. So the desire to develop the capacity of the heart, and to develop things like mindfulness, like love, compassion, determination, energy, patience, bliss. You need a desire to pursue those things. And anyone who's been on a spiritual path, and for you if you're just embarking on it, you will find that your desire will go up and down. There will be lapses in that sense of feeling motivated and feeling desire to continue on the path. And it'll be very clear for you how important that desire is. It is extremely precious. It's a fire that we need to keep alive. We need to tend to that fire always. And we're responsible for our own motivation. As a teacher, that is something that I will always try to encourage. I'll always try to motivate people, but ultimately we are all responsible for our own motivation, for our own desire for spiritual progress. So without that desire, we really won't get anywhere. Right? It's almost like it's a desire that you need to maybe one day end all desires. I also feel that sometimes there are deep longings that we have that should not just be dismissed. Now, a side note to this, if you are someone who is ready to defeat all desires, if you feel that is your path, that there is no desire in your life worth attacking, then by all means go forth. Go and kill that desire. Use the teachings. Sharpen your knife and make the kill. It's like for some people, the life of a monk makes a lot of sense because that, the only desire that they have is for enlightenment. That's really all that they need. And that there's actually a desire towards that, a deep longing towards that. And so I highly encourage that. And for me, growing up as a Buddhist and someone who took to meditation very early on in my life, I often had this question of should I become a monk? And I actually explored this several times in my life through meditation retreats, through periods of time where I restrained myself from certain entertainments and certain sense pleasures. And what I came to feel, what I feel now, is that there are things that I long for that feel aligned to sort of my purpose for being here. And I can use the word destiny. And part of that is actually to teach. meditation, to teach Dharma. That feels like a deep longing for me. My teacher Rob, he says, what you long for longs for you. And for some of us, you can get a sense of this in your life. Sometimes there are things that call out to you that last for years. They almost feel like they're coming from the deeper part of you. As I got older and I learned about the Taoist tradition, a lot of this started to make a little bit more sense. So in Taoism, they talk about having a curriculum. So as we're born into this life, we often bring with us a curriculum. So it's like a certain set of things, maybe it's one thing, maybe it's multiple things, that are deep longings that need to be fulfilled in order for us to die without regret. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is, I think something that is a little radical, that a lot of teachers around meditation don't talk about things in this way. But I do think that there are some desires that we should feel like we have permission to pursue. Now, what those are, that's sort of up to you to figure out. I want to speak about another time in my life where I felt a ton of desire, and this was when I co-founded a technology startup. And I remember, for the first couple of years, feeling this intense feeling of we don't have enough. We need more. We need to raise more money. We need to achieve more revenue. We need to hire more people. We need more success. And this is what happens for people in business in a competitive market. And I remember for me, this is something I took with me, when I went to sleep. It was with me when I woke up. It was with me always, except for maybe the times where I was able to meditate. And when I reflect on that time, it was, it's as if I had something that was eating away at my soul. What does it feel like to carry around this notion that what you currently have is just not enough? It's not good enough. It's extremely depleting, stressful, draining. It's demeaning. When we go to this place, we are demeaning ourselves. We're putting ourselves down, and we're not recognizing the preciousness of what we have, the preciousness of human life. So I'd like to offer one practical piece of advice to combat this, and we can say it's sort of like using a mantra. So you can find a phrase that makes you feel full, that makes you feel gratitude towards something that you have in your life. And every time the desire awakens in your mind, you can remind yourself with that mantra of what you have. So for me, I remember at this time in my life, feeling like there was so much I had to accomplish from a business standpoint that felt so far away. And by the way, this isn't something that the outside world would know. I mean, I was brimming with confidence, and in a lot of ways I had a lot of confidence about my business venture. But at the same time, there were moments of doubt and moments of feeling lack. And I think any business owner can relate to that. And in those times, I felt immense lack. So all throughout the day, I was going back and forth between feeling confidence, doubt, desire, so on and so forth. But anyway, the mantra I used was, I am a prince of the Dharma, heir to the Dharma throne. So you can see I used some dramatic language here, which worked for me. It may not work for you. And I was pointing to the idea that I actually am a prince. I am adorned with princely blessings. And that is this Dharma. Dharma means this teaching, this path from these traditions such as Buddhism and Taoism and others that I've been taught. And I always felt like I had been given such a beautiful gift through these teachings. So when I would say that to myself, I am a prince of the Dharma, it would tear a hole in the fabric of that desire that I had. And it would remind me that I already had something that was really precious. And so the way it worked is I couldn't acknowledge or appreciate the preciousness of what I had while feeling that same desire to that same degree. So I was starting to poke holes in the fabric of that desire, to make it like a Swiss cheese. And remember, the mind is habitual, so we can use right effort to orient the mind in a new direction. And so this was a systematic, methodical way of feeling abundance. So gratitude is a great remedy for desire. And again, you need to be systematic about it if this is the approach that you want. It's just as methodical and systematic as the desire is and that habit structure is. You need to be equally, if not more, rigorous and relentless with your mantra or your sense of abundance and gratitude. And after a while, this will become the new reality for you. Remember, your mind paints the world. You experience the world through your mind or in your mind or from your mind, however you want to think about it. Mind is always participating. So when you suggest to the mind that you actually have an abundance, the mind starts to take that in and feel it, and we start to feel different. We start to rise up beyond the desire and feel a sense of, yeah, I do have a lot. Imagine being a king or a queen and lamenting about not having enough. You start to feel that way. And the desires actually start to fade away. I've actually used this same approach to help with health issues, to actually suggest to the mind that I am healthy when the body doesn't feel that way. And I would do this by remembering what it's like to be healthy, by letting go of my fears of falling ill, and just gradually, systematically hammering away and suggesting over and over again that I am healthy, I'm in the peak of health. And just appreciating the health that I have. And I can tell you that this was so effective. And that's because of how powerful the mind is. The body responds to the mind. And you'll see this with all of the hindrances. One of the things that we can do is we can suggest the opposite of the hindrance to the mind. So we'll talk about the other ones, but in terms of desire, we can suggest a sense of abundance. And we can also think about the example of monks. A monk is someone who has given up all worldly possessions. There are monks from all kinds of different traditions across different religions, but I can speak to Buddhist monks. Theravada Buddhist monks are not allowed to own money, to own food even, so they have to beg for food. But a real monk who has developed their mind feels abundance. They don't feel like they don't have enough. They feel full. So why is that? It's, again, this quality of abundance, and the antidote to desire is not dependent on external factors. It's an internal factor. It's an internal capacity. I'd like to offer one more statement about desire. Desire makes us ineffective. And I'll say that again. Desire makes us ineffective. So a lot of us think that desire is what makes us effective at certain things. And so I would say perhaps a certain level of desire is helpful. Like, for example, the desire for spiritual progress is absolutely crucial, right? In order to sustain practice. However, the type of desire that makes us feel like we don't have enough, that we're lacking, that makes us ineffective. And so for any of you out there who have played beer pong, how does it feel when you're playing beer pong and you're missing all your shots? Let's say you open the game and you go 5 straight shots without making anything. Desire starts to make the body rigid. And you really want to make the next one. And that desire actually, it locks up the body, it locks up the fluidity and the ability to relax. It prevents us from feeling confidence. And as Mike Tyson says, confidence breeds success, and success breeds confidence. So this is the aspect of desire that can make us ineffective. I can say the same thing from playing basketball. One of the reasons why, when you're going on a hot streak, why that continues is the desire faculty has started to quiet down. We don't feel so needy. We don't need the ball to go in the hoop as much. There's a relaxing that allows us to get into what's called the zone, right? Whereas when we're playing and we feel like we need to get something done, what does that do? Again, it locks up our ability to be effective and to perform a function smoothly. So I wanted to bring this up as a last point on desire, and I'd encourage you all to think about whatever it is that you do in your vocation, like your job, or if it's a hobby, something else that you're pursuing, and examine the types of desires that you have in that path. And you'll see that perhaps there is a desire that sustains you, that keeps you motivated, a deep longing. That's the reason that you're pursuing this in the first place. And again, that's an assumption that may or may not be there, but perhaps that's there. But perhaps there's also these other desires that make you feel like you don't have enough, that you're lacking, that like you're in debt. And just examine how those desires impact your ability to perform. So I offer this for your reflection, and I hope that it's been helpful.